Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcon Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm Aaron Freeman over at FalFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Karasik, who writes for Sportsnot. We are back this week on a Wednesday evening to discuss updates on what's been going on with the Falcons over the past week. We will also be doing our weekly positional previews. This week we're on the offensive line. And as usual, we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions throughout the show and at the end of the show. All right, Scott, let's get into the news. Let's jump off on the thing that created a little bit of buzz last week, and we got to hear Roddy White on the radio. I forget which station, and he basically was talking quite candidly about what happened last year with his relationship with Kyle Shanahan and why he, the reasons he thought that he was written out of the offense and whatnot. And in that conversation he had, he basically said that he was of the opinion that had the Falcons, there was a couple of games that the Falcons lost that if he had been used more, he felt that they wouldn't have lost those games. I guess, what were your big takeaways from that whole thing? Do you put a whole lot of stock in it, or is it one of those things where it's just like, you move on and whatever?
I mean, you're gonna miss this. Like, he's been with the team for so long. He's had his role for so long that for him to go from true number 2 receiver in the offense to, oh, hey, I'm going to be a blocking guy. I'm going to be the 4th or 5th best option. That's going to be his overall role. It's going to mess with people a lot. It's going to mess with him a lot. He's not going to be very happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't fault Roddy for saying anything that he said. I don't quite agree with all the things that he said, but particularly the part about missing the playoffs. But it is one of those things where I think he has every right to feel the way that he feels because, given what he's done in Atlanta, and sort of, you can certainly make a case that, he was lied to about what his role was going to be. I mean, you could make that case. And certainly from his perspective, I certainly understand why he would certainly feel that way. So, it was good to hear sort of Roddy sort of say his side of the argument in his own words and not have to sort of parse out what he thinks or what he feels based off of a couple of sound bites. You could hear it from himself. But it is one of those things where it's like, we hopefully the Falcons have moved on and become a better team. It doesn't diminish anything that Roddy White has done over the last 11 years in Atlanta. But, it's a shame that it ended so bitterly, I guess.
I don't think it was as bitter as people want to say outside of him versus Shanahan. I think he loved Dan Quinn. I think he loved Matt Ryan. I think he loves Julio. He and Julio are probably best friends. I just think that he and Shanahan never got along, never agreed on his role, never felt like he was going to change by him going to him. And I don't think he took it well. And I think that's part of the reason why you may not be very high on Shanahan yourself is because you felt that Roddy might have done okay in the offense as well. What I saw was a guy who was kind of half-assing it out there last year.
No, I don't think I think Roddy was bad last year. I don't think Shanahan, like I do feel like Shanahan did underuse him in the offense, but I don't feel like him using him more really would have made that much of a difference. It certainly would have made a difference in Roddy's stat totals. I feel like he probably could have easily gotten another 15 or 20 receptions for X number of yards and probably a few more touchdowns. But I don't think it would have had a drastic impact on the Falcons season. Like, I don't think that was the difference between us winning or losing games. I just think it would have just made Roddy feel better, and it certainly would have made fans feel better about his role. But I feel like his skill level, not only in 2015 but also in 2014, had diminished so much that it just kind of like, even if he was 20% better, he still would have been a below average NFL wide receiver. So, I mean, I know that's blasphemous to say because, it doesn't, for me, it doesn't, like, I don't look at the last two seasons and make that judge Roddy White's career. Like, I still look at, his 2010 season, I would put that up against any of the seasons that Julio has had. That's how good he was. So it's like, it doesn't diminish Roddy White in my eyes whatsoever, but it is one of those things where it's like, yeah, he just wasn't good the last 2 years. And, like, I don't think whether, like, my issues with Kyle Shanahan are not Roddy White related. Like, so that's the one area I think Kyle Shanahan got it right pretty much, because it's like, he wasn't going to do anything.
I guess I'm one of the few that is just kind of like, all right, I like Roddy White. He's always going to be one of my favorite players, but he's done. And I understand him bitching, but at this point, like, he just needs to move on and kind of just be like, hey, maybe I wasn't that great. No one's offered me a contract yet. Maybe I should end up sticking it out, and maybe I should try and be on TV.
Maybe. I mean, I remember telling people last season that his career, he was at the same point that Reggie Wayne was at the end of his career, where we saw this with Reggie Wayne last offseason, where no one wanted to give him a job, and he went to New England for 2 weeks, and then he was like, no, I'm done. And I think that's where Roddy White is at. I think a team could sign him and get still some production out of him if they play him exclusively in the slot, where I think he still can create some mismatches. But as an outside receiver, I think if you put him outside in your offense, you're going to be very disappointed with how he performs. It's just,
I think you're going to see Joe Horn 2007 levels from Roddy White if you sign him this year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, to me, it's the same. Like, we saw this with Donald Driver. We saw this with Hines Ward. You see this with a lot of the top receivers. At some point in time, the wheels fall off. And I think for Roddy White, I think injuries, that knee injury was a major issue in 2014. Age, he's just not able to recover. And part of the problem has been he's been asked to gut through injuries the last couple of years, that he just really doesn't have the ability to rebound quickly from. And so the Falcons really needed to have done a better job sort of managing his keeping him on a pitch count these last couple of years, and they really haven't done a great job of that. And I think it led to him, falling off the cliff of maybe a year or two earlier than probably should have. But, again, I feel like Roddy is right. Roddy has done so much for this team that he can say whatever he wants to say, and I'm not going to judge him harshly for it, So I don't, again, as I said, I don't really agree with everything he said about it, but it is his right to say it, and I'm not going to, whatever. I can't think of the word, but whatever he says is fine. Like, I'm not losing any sleep over it, but.
Yeah, we can move on from that.
Okay, now, a lot of the buzz this week has been talking, at least grabbing headlines, has been with what is the workload going to be at the running back position, where Falcons running back coach Bobby Turner came out the other day, I think it was to the AJC, and basically said that they're looking to reduce Devontae Freeman's workload this year and try to get Tevin Coleman a little bit more involved this year. We talked about this last week when we did or 2 weeks ago when we did the running back positional preview. But, in light of the Falcons coaching staff saying what they said, where do you sort of stand on this issue, Scott?
I mean, a lot of people think that it means Tevin Coleman is going to be the main back, and I don't see that happening. Yeah, I just don't see that happening at all. I do see Freeman getting his workload reduced, but it's not going to be as reduced as some people are making it out to be. He's not going to go from 270 carries, or what was it, 270 that he had last year?
Yeah, I think it's
Right about
265.
265. He's not going to go from 265 carries to 100 carries overnight. It's not going to be like that. But I do think you'll see him go down to like 200, 225, that range. I think that's the sweet spot for him this year anyway. And I don't think that's a bad workload either. Because 225, even if it's 225 over 16 games, that's 13 to 14 carries per game. I think that's about what we were expecting anyway. And then another say 5 to 10 from Tevin Coleman. So say Coleman gets 10 a game at 16. That's 16. That's 150 carries, we'll just say. So 225 for Devontae, 150 for Tevin, split up about 45 between, Teron Ward or Brandon Wilds or whoever makes that last spot on the roster for third running back. If they end up carrying 4, just split it between those guys. And then like 3 or 4 for just those end arounds / Patrick DeMarco / kneel downs. And then you've got Matt Ryan and whatever his scrambles are going to be. So there's your like 430 carries you'll get this year. I just don't see Devontae Freeman going down completely. I think that he's going to get maybe 50 catches this year too, as opposed to the 73, which is fine. They're going to try and reduce his overall workload, but I could still see him hitting 1,000 yards rushing and 500 yards receiving, even on a lighter workload, because they're going to want him to be more efficient and he'll be fresher, which will only help him out.
Yeah, I think those numbers you rattled off, Scott, because I was looking at the numbers myself earlier today, and they're about, I think, where the Falcons probably want it to be. Now, obviously, the question is whether what you want is whether what you're going to get, and I think the key probably is they're probably envisioning sort of a workload similar to like Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard, who I think averages like 14 carries a game, and Bernard gets about 9, I think, or something like that. And but the issue with that is what makes it different here in Atlanta versus that is Bernard gets his carries because he's their primary third down running back. And so he gets a lot of opportunities in passing situations, basically, where, it'll be a passing formation and they'll hand the ball off to Gio Bernard to try to catch the defense off guard. And the problem in Atlanta is Devontae Freeman is their primary passing guy. So really for Tevin Coleman to really get that amount of carries, he has to really carve into Freeman's like first and second down workload. And he has to get to a level where the Falcons feel like there can be a drop-off between them, but that drop-off is pretty minimal. And, based off of last year, that gap wasn't quite there. That difference was pretty big. You look at the numbers in the 8 games that Devontae Freeman started and finished, and Coleman was healthy for it, and Ward was also in the mix. Like, Coleman only averaged about 3 touches in those games. So it's one of those things where, like, I think the Falcons definitely want to get him more involved, but it is one of those situations where if he can't carve out a significant role on third downs, where the Falcons feel like they're interchangeable in passing situations, which we haven't seen enough right now to think that that's going to happen, it's going to be hard for Coleman to get more than maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 carries a game. It's just going to be hard for them, especially if Freeman is, the same player he was at the beginning of last season. So I feel like that, the ideal situation is for Freeman to get probably down in the 220, 230 range. But it may just wind up being that, Coleman winds up getting like, instead of 150, he gets like 100 or 120 or something like that, as opposed to, which is an improvement, a significant improvement based off of where he was last year. But it's, it's really on Coleman to basically take carries from Freeman as opposed to the Falcons taking carries from Freeman. Because the one thing we know about Kyle Shanahan's offense is he's going to give the ball to whoever he thinks is the best running back. We saw that in Washington when Alfred Morris went from like the fifth string running back to the opening day starter back in 2012. We saw that in Cleveland in 2014, where basically Isaiah Crowell and Ben Tate and who was the other running back there? The rookie from Towson.
Terrence West.
Terrence West. Basically, those guys were alternating who was getting the most carries week to week. So, I don't think Shanahan's going to be afraid to give Coleman reps if he feels like Coleman's the best option, but it's really up to Coleman to prove that he's the best option, and that is what we're going to have to be on the lookout for this year.
I can agree there. I do remember that he rode Steve Slayton pretty hard when he was in Houston. I could see him. I still think that the ideal split is Freeman getting the most carries, just because he's got the best vision out of all the backs that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand why people would want Coleman to get as many carries as possible, as that home run ability that you can't teach.
Yeah, I mean, the one real knock on Freeman is that he doesn't have that home run ability. Like, he doesn't get – it's hard for him to get those 30 and 40 and 50-yard runs that Coleman can get, or at least should be able to get much more easily. Freeman is more of he can get the 10 or 15-yard runs more so, which no one's going to, turn their nose up at. But that having that explosive element on the ground where you can hand the ball off to Tevin Coleman and get 40 yards at a chunk would be very beneficial to this team, particularly because of how reliant the offense is on the running game. If you can, move the ball effectively and not have to rely on Julio Jones to make all the big plays, then that will do a whole lot of good for this team in this upcoming season. Now, let's switch things to the defense. The other news that came out earlier this week was that Keanu Neal is working out with Cam Chancellor. What are your thoughts on that, Scott?
I like it because it's basically saying, hey, this is the guy who the scheme was designed around and his role. Go learn from him on how to do your job, because this is what the role is like. And it sounds like it was Cam Chancellor who reached out to Keanu Neal and was like, hey, come work out with me. I'll be in Atlanta all offseason. Let's do this. I'm kind of thinking that it wasn't just Cam Chancellor reaching out. I kind of want to say that, the conspiracy theorist in me is kind of saying, you know what, Dan Quinn made this happen.
Okay.
He was like, hey, Cam, you're my boy from Seattle. I want you to work with my new guy, Keanu, and just kind of help him out. And I think that's what's really going to help out Keanu in his transition from college to pros. But it's probably 3 or 4 years down the line until we see Keanu making that kind of impact in the defense, unless he's just that quick, which is fine because he's only 20 years old. But I think we're going to have average to above average safety play from him for a couple of years. We'll be happy with him, don't get me wrong. I just don't see us going like, oh man, this guy's the best safety in the NFL, until he gets to that 23, 24, 25 years old and he really just understands the NFL and really understands what he's supposed to do. I think he's got that potential to be like Cam Chancellor. I just don't see him as that. How do you explain it? I don't see him as that number one guy early on in his career. I think it takes a little bit for safeties to really adjust. Like, I know people aren't a fan of Thomas Decoud, but it took him about 2 years to adjust into a full-time starter. And then once he did, he went to a Pro Bowl. Obviously, he fell off right after, but he did have a good couple of seasons there from 11 to 13. I think William Moore was the same way. As a rookie, he was okay, but then his second year, his third year, he really got good. And then he became a Pro Bowler himself. So I think as you get into it, the more you let these guys play, the third, the fourth, the fifth year that these guys get into the league is when they really make their impact. But I don't think Keanu Neal is going to be bad this year by any means.
Yeah, I'm sort of the same way. I feel the way with Keanu Neal. I feel like he won't be able to unlock his full potential until the Falcons make an upgrade at free safety. And that sounds like I'm knocking Ricardo Allen. It's not meant to be that, but it is one of those things where I don't necessarily know. Well, based off what we've seen with Ricardo Allen so far, which is really all I can judge at this point in time, it's like I don't think he's quite at the he can allow Keanu Neal to be as free and sort of play his style of football that he wants to play to reach his max potential in the same way that Cam Chancellor does with Earl Thomas. That's not to belittle how good a player Cam Chancellor is, but when you have the best, when you're playing beside the best free safety, and basically you only have to once in a blue moon ever really have to deal with sort of, you don't have to worry about the deep ball basically in Seattle, where you basically all Cam Chancellor has to do is play downhill, which is the strength of his game. And I feel like Keanu Neal, until the Falcons can make that upgrade at free safety, where the deep ball is basically a non-factor against their secondary. Don't get me wrong, because I feel like Ricardo Allen was very good playing center field last year. So,
I agree.
But it is one of those things where I don't necessarily know if Neal is going to be able to just play as fast and loose as he possibly can until that happens. And, in the meantime, I do think he will be a good addition. I do feel like he'll probably be William Moore-esque in sort of his impact. But, a player like Chancellor is just a outright dominant player. And I don't necessarily expect Neal to reach that level, but I feel like he could if we get slightly better free safety play. So it's not to say that I don't think Allen is capable of doing it, but he just needs to make that next leap before it happens.
I'm with you. I think Allen at his best could be like Jarvis Bird in terms of the kind of athlete that he is, in terms of the kind of ball hawk that he is, the kind of just he's got great awareness. He's got great ball skills, but can he be that rangy center fielder? You've got to see it. I'm with you there. I think he can. I think he could be that like 6, 7, 8 interception kind of guy back there, to where you're at least going, man, if we challenge him deep, we got to worry about, putting the ball in the right spot, and Alford's going to take it, which that alone would be enough to help cut some of that out. But I don't know if he's going to be that guy where you're like, oh, man, Julio Jones is going deep. Can he stop him? Odell Beckham's going deep. Can he stop him? Which, I mean, if you're only really worried about the top 2 or 3 guys in the league at that point, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's just that you got to get him to that point.
Yeah, my thing with Allen is I think if I could go back and look at like his 10 best plays, make a cut-up of his 10 best plays, you would look at that and you would compare it to some of the other top free safeties in the league and be like, there is no difference. I think the issue with Allen at this point isn't his best plays, whether he can play at a high level. It's the lower end of the spectrum. It's the negative plays. It's the missed tackles. It's the times when he's reacting a bit too late. It's the times where he reacts on time, but he's one or half a step too slow to get there. And it's those plays that need to be eliminated from the equation before I can sit there and say that, yes, he is one of the best safeties in the league. Because, safeties get beat, as all defensive backs get beat from time to time. But the best guys in the league, it's rare when they get beat. It's like one of those things like, oh, my God, like with Desmond Trufant, you're like, oh, Desmond Trufant did not play that well against Jacksonville. That's a shock, because it's like it had been like 6 or 7 weeks prior to that where you didn't have to worry about Desmond Trufant playing it poorly. And it was one of those things.
And even then, he only allowed like 3 catches.
Yeah, it was like he got beat on like 3 plays, but it was like 3 plays that you rarely see him get beat on.
Yeah,
and that was the thing. It's like, oh, Allen Robinson is kind of good. I guess when he faces a really good 6'3" wide receiver, then he might have some troubles there.
Which to be fair, Allen Robinson was probably a top 5 or 6 receiver in the league this past year. So that's understandable. You're going to struggle with those kind of guys.
Yeah.
You know, if those are the kind of guys that Alford ends up struggling with, I'm okay with that. And I think that's where his potential's at. I don't think he's like Desmond Trufant-esque, but I think within the scheme, within his role, he can be a good player. Because I think it maximizes his strengths and it minimizes his weaknesses.
Yeah.
And I think the only real issue that I have with Alfred back there is his long speed and his tackling. I think he can get his tackling locked up to where he's only missing like 3 or 4 in a year. My question is, his long speed, you can't really change that, so you just got to get his instincts up. And the only way he'll do that is by repetition, going back there every play, seeing the defenses from that different spot on the field and knowing exactly what he has to do.
All right. This next tidbit was something that Scott threw in at the last second. I guess I should check this out before we start talking about it. But the other news item is Matt Ryan and his Pokemon Go. I guess what addiction? I guess you got any takes on Matt Ryan? Is he spending too much of his summer playing Pokemon instead of burying his nose in that playbook or something, Scott?
No, I just think he's bored this offseason. We've actually seen some personality from Matt Ryan for once. When you go back and you look at some of his tweets from this offseason, you're like, wait, when did Matt Ryan actually get funny? When did he not become the boring guy, we all know and some of us love? Yeah, he's my favorite Falcons quarterback in history, but I know that there's a lot of people that are still clamoring for Vic to come back.
I'm clamoring for Vic to come back, but it doesn't because I have an issue with Matt Ryan.
No, for you, it's because you have an issue with Matt Shaw. I mean, if we're putting it out there, like, that's a legitimate thing to argue. Is Michael Vick better than Matt Schaub? Well, probably. Is Michael Vick better than Matt Ryan? At this point in their careers, hell no. But Matt Schaub, yeah, I'd agree with you there. He's probably better than Matt Schaub. He gives you a different element than what Ryan does. Okay. Would I have Michael Vick back at this point in his career? Yes. And it's only because I honestly feel like he's atoned for what he did back in 2007. Just completely, for use of a better word, fucking the Falcons franchise where they were. And saying, screw you guys, I don't want to play for you because I'd rather fight dogs that just didn't sit well with me. But the fact that he's gone to jail, he's paid his dues, he's had to go through 3 different other teams just to even have a spot in the league. I'm at a point, or maybe it's even 4 different teams, but 3 different teams to even have a spot in the league. That says to me that he understands life, at least at this point. And he understands that he could be a backup for a guy like Matt Ryan and be okay with it. And I would take him back just because I think he's better than Matt Schaub. But that's about it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I know people sit there and they're like, oh, my God, if Michael Vick was in town, the minute Matt Ryan would throw an interception, people would start booing him and they'd be clamoring for Vick and they would create all this nonsense. And I understand why people have that opinion, but at the end of the day, that doesn't bother me. If people boo Matt Ryan, then they boo Matt Ryan. It's like people want to be knuckleheads, then they can be knuckleheads. It's like if Michael Vick helps us win, a game that gives us a better chance of winning a game where Matt Ryan's hurt or something like that, then to me it's worth it. But having to deal with fan backlash, I think that's not really an issue in my opinion. But yeah. And we did get a question from Dustin, the Falcon Hawaii, about the percentage of splits between Freeman and Coleman I know we broke it down. Do you want to throw a number out there, Scott, before we move on?
Yeah, so if you say that you have 450 carries in a year, that's like the goal for the offense. Freeman's going to see 225 out of those 450, so it'll be about 50% of the carries in the offense. I think you're going to see Coleman with about 150, which is about 33%. And then you're going to see other, which is like Matt Ryan scrambles and all the other just stuff that goes on, like reverses with Sanu, because there's probably going to be 4 or 5 of those. You're going to see, I guess you could say like the wildcat plays that they might run with Sanu. So the different like wrinkles in the offense, and then even the third running back is going to be that extra 16% that's left over.
Yeah. The numbers I threw out there, if you look at that 8-game stretch between the Redskins game and the first Panthers game, I think it was, where all 3 running back, minus the Vikings and Colts game, where all 3 running backs were healthy. You look at the total offensive touches that, if you count rushing attempts and targets as offensive touches, over that period of time, Freeman got like 87% of the touches. And I feel like the Falcons probably will want to reduce that to like 75%. And again, that's including receptions, where Freeman's probably going to get the brunt of the receptions from the running back position.
I'd say Freeman gets 75% of those catches from the running back spot.
Yeah. So it's one of those. That's why the number seems so high when I say 75%. It's not 75% of the rushing attempts. It's 75% of all the offensive touches. So I feel like at a minimum, the Falcons want to get that down to 75%. And then if it goes down lower to like 67% or 65% or something like that, that's going to be what's depending on basically Tevin Coleman coming along and saying, I'm good enough to be a starting caliber running back in this league. I deserve more carries. But if not, then it's just going to go to Freeman, because he's the starter, and if he's the starter, he's the better guy. So you're going to get the ball to the better running back. So that's how it usually works. All right, Scott. Let's jump into our positional preview with the offensive line. We can sort of separate this into 2 different groups, because the offensive tackles they have their own positional battles, and the interior offensive line have their own positional battles. So starting with the offensive tackles, we know Jake Matthews, Ryan Schrader, they're locks to be starters. The real issues going into training camp is between Bryce Harris, Tom Compton, Lawrence Gibson, and those guys competing to be the swing tackle. And if the Falcons wind up keeping 1 swing tackle or 2, and, given that Compton can also play some guard, maybe he'll get in the mix there, and maybe that will allow the Falcons to say, hey, we'll keep both Harris and Gibson at tackle and move Compton. Whatever the case may be, sort of how do you see particularly that swing tackle spot competition breaking down with Tom Compton and Bryce Harris being the 2 main competitors?
I think Compton's got experience both on the left and the right side. Harris has experience on both the left and the right side. They both have experience in zone blocking schemes. Honestly, in the end, I think it's going to be Harris who wins that 3rd job, just because that's what makes the most sense in my head. He's got the most experience in the current Falcons scheme with the Falcons. But I do think that he's probably a better player than Compton is. I just don't think Compton's that good. And I think when you're looking for that 4th spot, you kind of look at, can this guy play special teams, or can this guy develop into something better than what he is? And Lawrence Gibson might have more of that than Compton does. Compton he is what he is. But I don't see Compton being the leader for that swing tackle spot at all.
Okay. Compton will probably wind up winning that spot just because of the familiarity he has with the coaching staff. More so, I feel like Bryce Harris was signed last year as an emergency guy, more so than because the Falcons really want to hitch their wagons to him long term. And I feel like Compton is the guy that they had an opportunity to purposely go out and get, and that's why they signed him this offseason. So I feel like it's Compton's job to lose, similar to how it was Tyler Columbus's job to lose last year. Now, obviously, Columbus wound up losing the job, and then wound up winning a Super Bowl with the Broncos, and going out with Peyton Manning on top, I guess you could say. But it is one of those things where I feel like if push comes to shove, Compton will be given the benefit of the doubt over Harris. The interesting thing with Gibson is I think Gibson is the best athlete of those guys, but I think, he's got still a lot of work to be done to get up to speed, but he's been able to bounce around the league the last couple of years, largely because teams like his upside and his athleticism. So I feel like he can certainly wind up earning a spot because of that, because unlike those other two, as you said, Scott, I feel like he has the potential to grow from where he is today. Like I feel like Harris, we know what Bryce Harris is, which is a below average replacement level starter when he gets the opportunity to play. Compton was basically that in Washington. I don't think that's going to change that much in Atlanta. And Gibson has the potential at least to become more than that. And whether he shows that this summer or in future years, we'll have to see. But I feel like that's his best avenue to making the team.
So what we're saying is Matthew Strader are the starting tackles no matter what. I agree there. Swing tackle will say Compton, with Harris getting cut, and then Gibson being the developmental guy. So of the 9 offensive linemen that the team will tend to carry, you're saying that 4 of them are going to be tackles, which is pretty standard for the Falcons. And one of them is going to be Lawrence Gibson, and you're going to have Gibson and Compton who can both play guard in a pinch. So if you've got like 4 guards that go down, you've got both those guys that can play guard in a pinch.
Well, I mean, I would say at this point I would probably pick Harris to win over Gibson, but I just feel like that battle between the two of them is so close that I could see Gibson leapfrogging him. But if you had to ask me if I was going to put money on it, I'd probably put money on Harris just because I think Gibson's still a little too raw to really trust to play. But I feel like he could easily, because of that upside, he could easily leapfrog Harris by the time we get to the end of the camp. So
see, when you're looking at that kind of thing, when I always do my roster projections, I look at the 53rd man. Who could be that 53rd man? Who could be that guy who sticks at that last spot on the roster? And that's an active every week. And Gibson is kind of that guy for me. He is that 53rd man. I don't see him ever being active.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like Harris might take the spot, just because in the event that if he's active, it's going to be because someone is injured. And it's going to be a situation where they're going to want someone who's ready to play right now. And I don't know if Gibson's there yet. He may be there by the time we get through training camp. That's the point I'm going to make. Like, by the time we get through training camp, we may be able to change that opinion. But based off of where he was at the end of last year's playing time, last year's preseason, he wasn't there yet. And I feel like Harris has proven over the case of being in the league for 4 or 5 years and having opportunities to play and start in New Orleans. He's a known commodity, and Gibson isn't there yet, and that's why I would put more stock in Harris making the team over Gibson, but it's close. Now, enough about the backups. Let's talk about the starters, and let's talk about whether or not how much improvement, if any, Matthews and Ryan Schrader can be expected to make. Now, Jake Matthews is a pretty good left tackle. Will this be the year that you think he's going to be a very good left tackle, where he can throw his name in the hat with the guys like the Trent Williamses, the Joe Staleys, the Tyron Smiths, those caliber left tackles out there in the league?
Well, I mean, Tyron Smith's like the best left tackle in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be that good this year, but I do think he could be like Joe Staley caliber very easily. I think he could be right up there with those guys very easily. Like in that 4 to 7 range this year, I could see him taking that leap. A lot of offensive linemen take a couple of years to really adjust. Pretty much any NFL player takes a couple of years to adjust. And I feel like with Matthews, he's finally getting to that spot where he's not just adjusted to the league, but he's finally got his strength up. He's finally got a program where he just looks like he's ready. Late in the season last year, he looked like he was ready to make that leap this year. Like, you could see him just kind of have everything click. He put in 4 or 5 great performances right at the end of the year. And I think with a better center in the middle, that's only going to help him.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I like Jake. I think he has the most upside of any of our offensive linemen in terms of being significantly better than what we've seen to date. I feel like some of these other guys, we sort of have seen their best football, and it's just really about them leveling out for the next year or couple of years, more so than making leaps. I don't quite think Jake is on that level. Like, I don't put him on the same level as Trent Williams yet or Joe Staley, but I feel like he could get there within another year or two. I don't necessarily think he's going to make that leap this year, but I feel like, other than, I think Jake is fine. Like, I don't lose any sleep over what Jake does at his spot. Like, it's one of those things where I feel like he's probably our best run blocker, which I don't think he gets enough credit for. Like, I think he's a better run blocker than Ryan Schrader is, even though I know Schrader probably grades higher because I think Schrader is probably more consistent, like consistently solid. But I feel like Jake has the higher upside to really get out there on reach blocks and make plays in space, which you kind of need in this scheme. I don't think Schrader's really that good at that. But it is going to be, the third year for offensive tackles is really the year where everything is supposed to click for them. And I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that when it does click for Jake, it will solidify him as one of the better left tackles in the league. Where he ranks, whether it's 4th or 7th or 12th, is something that we like to debate. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. As long as I feel like when we play the Rams and he's blocking Robert Quinn, or when we play the Raiders and he's blocking Bruce Irvin, I'm not worried about his being able to block those guys. That's all that really matters. Where he ranks at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much.
I'm not really worried about him blocking those guys now.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm a little concerned. That's what I'll say. I'm a little concerned. Like, I don't think he's going to get destroyed by those guys or anything like that, but I do feel like they could make some impact plays that could change the outcome of that game.
I mean, I'm just going back to this past year, and, the Falcons didn't play a ton of great pass rushers, but Jake only allowed, I think, 1 sack or no sacks all year. It was either 1 sack or 1 hit all year. Like, it was insane. I'm not worried about him in the passing game. I'm worried about him being able to get the push against some of the bigger guys that he's going to go up against, like Kansas City, like when he's got to go up against Alvin Bailey in Kansas City, when he has to go up against what's his name in Denver, Wolf in Denver. I'm just brain farting here. San Diego's got a couple of big guys. Like, I'm afraid that he's not going to get the same kind of push that he needs to get against some of these 3-4 teams, like Arizona, Calais Campbell, or Nkundiche. I don't know if he's going to get that same kind of push against those guys that he does against the smaller guys like the Jerry Hugheses of the world or the Bruce Irvins of the world that I think he'll just destroy in the running game.
Okay.
But I'm not as afraid of his pass blocking. I think his pass blocking is the reason why I have him in the top 10 for left tackles in the NFL. Okay. And yeah, he is a good run blocker, but he's not a overpowering bruiser. He's more of I'm gonna beat you with technique. Now, don't get me wrong, it was hilarious watching him drag, I think, a Carolina player. And I think it was a Carolina player. Like halfway down the field, he was going up against a linebacker, and he just pushed him 40 yards up the field. Maybe I'm thinking Jacksonville, but it was towards the end of the season last year, and I was just like, man, he's finally getting it. He finally understands it. He just drove a guy back 40 yards up the field, and it was on a long run.
Yeah. let's talk a little bit about Ryan Schrader. And I think this year is going to be an interesting year for Schrader, just because he's on the verge of getting a long-term contract. He's going to be like 28, I think, next offseason, 28, 29. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Falcons structure that, because he's going to be relative for offensive tackles. He's going to get a little long in the tooth. But it is one of those things where he's certainly earned a big contract, but I feel like how big a contract he's going to get is going to depend on how he handles facing some really good pass rushers this year. And
is he really going to be that long in the tooth for just not meaning to cut you off, but I don't think he's going to be that old after this season when you compare all the starting tackles in the league, especially right tackles. Like, Sebastian Vollmer's going to be 33, 34 this year or after this year. Eric Winston is still starting, and he's like 34, 33 or 34. You got what's his name? Donald Penn is out there at left tackle. Yeah, he's a little old, but you got Penn out there. You got Doug Free, who's lasted forever in Dallas, and he doesn't have the same kind of miles as these guys. Jason Peters is 34. Like, there's a lot of guys. Like, Zach Strief has been around for feels like forever, and he's only, 32, 33? I mean, there's a lot of guys that have been around for a long time. Offensive linemen can stay in that top range, especially at right tackle, for a little bit longer than they can at, say, any other position. I mean, you'll see guys there until they're 35, 36, still playing at a high level.
Well, I think it's interesting some of those names you named, because it does seem that there's a tendency among NFL teams that once offensive tackles get around age 31, 32, teams start planning to replace them. Like you say, if Streif's 32, the Saints just drafted a right tackle to replace him last year when he was 31. Jason Peters started dealing with injuries around the age of 31, 32. We cut Tyson Clabo when he was like 31 or 32. We cut Justin Blaylock when he was 31 or 32. Like, Eric Winston hasn't been a viable, like, he's started games these last couple of years, but he's been basically a journeyman for the last 3 or 4 years since he was about 31 or 32. So it is one of those things where I feel like it's not to say that Schrader can't play beyond 31 or 32, but I don't think the Falcons can sort of sign him thinking, oh, yeah, he's definitely going to start and be a high caliber right tackle till he's 33 or 34. I just think that's a bad assumption to make, regardless of how much tread he has on the tires, because at a certain point, regardless of your wear and tear through the 20s, your body doesn't like Roddy didn't get hurt in his 20s, but the minute he turned 31 and got hurt, he couldn't recover because your body just can't do it.
The difference there is Roddy was 21 when he started in the NFL. A lot of these guys are 21, 22, 23 when they start in the NFL. Schrader was 26. So the timeline gets pushed back. He also didn't really play in high school. So when you look at that,
that was the whole argument people made with Michael Turner, and it didn't work. Like, it doesn't. Like,
Turner was a running back too.
No, but the body, I can't sit here and tell you what Ryan Schrader's body is going to be or going to be. That's up to a medical doctor. But the point I'm trying to make is, whether you've been beaten up at 26 or 21, your body is not able to recover as well at 31 or 32, regardless of how much wear you've had in your 20s. And so that's the point. And so if he gets hurt at some point at 31 or 32, which he'll be more prone to do because his body is going to break down more easily at that age than it did at 26 or 27, he's not going to be able to recover. And that's when you're going to start to see the play start to decline. So it's one of those things where you're basically betting on him being able to stay healthy for an entire season, which, I don't think he was healthy last year, to be honest with you, but he managed to gut through it. And I feel like that's a hidden secret about last season, but we'll see how it plays out. But I just think it would be silly for the Falcons to basically sign him to a new contract and expect him to play more than 2 or 3 good years. If he does, then great.
I'm not saying sign him to a 7-year deal. I'm saying sign him to like a 4-year deal.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how the Falcons structure it, because I think you sign him to a 4 or 5 year deal, you basically have to structure it in a way where you can get out of the contract in year 3, which is what we know the Falcons typically don't really do when it comes to offensive tackle contracts, as we can say to the Sam Baker deal. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, you're not going to give him a Sam Baker deal. You're going to give him more of that Tyson Clabo contract that was easy to get out of after 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, how much money Schrader makes after the season, I think it's going to depend on, how he deals with the Khalil Macks and the Von Millers of the world.
I agree.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's move on to the interior offensive line, where we have a lot more guys competing for roster spots. We know who the starting center is going to be, Alex Mack. Doesn't sound like there's a lot of competition for that left guard spot with Andy Levitre. But it does seem like there is a little bit more competition at that right guard spot with Chris Chester. I feel like Chris Chester is probably going to win the job. I think this is more people making more out of it than it needs to be. But how do you feel about Chris Chester's holding a roster spot and whether or not he's a lock or a near lock or the anti-lock, I guess, of making the team?
Oh, I think he's a lock. I think he's making the roster. I think Levitre, and Person are all pretty much guaranteed roster spots, which kind of suck if you're James Stone, Ben Garland, Colin Rarig, Michael Huey, Shabazz Ahmed, or Jake Reed. But when you hear those names kind of ran off, you're like, well, all these guys kind of blow. So I hate to say it, but once you get past Chester, Person, Levitre, and Schweitzer, you've got pretty much nothing. That includes your boy James Stone. Now, whether Chester's got a lock on the starting job, I don't agree with. I think between Chester and Person, you've actually got competition there. And whether it ends up being Chester who wins the job, Person who wins the job, hell, was Schweitzer winning the job? We don't know just yet. But I do think Mike Person could end up taking that job and providing NFL average play, which if Schrader plays, 95% of how well he did last year, he's still a top 5 right tackle. You've got a top 10 center easily. You've got a top 10 left tackle, and you've got an average guard on the other side. You just need those guys to play as a unit, and you'll be fine. Now, when you throw in there that Person was one of the lowest rated centers last year, it hurts. But if he ends up being a solid right guard, an average right guard, the things that were making him look bad at center won't show up on film at right guard. The bad snaps, the hitting up, just hitting up the wrong guys in protections. Like it was pretty obvious that he just didn't understand how to do protection calls on a lot of plays.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
On Mike Person. As for Chester, as I said, I don't feel like there's that much competition at the right guard spot. I feel like that's more because he was hurt and someone has to get those first team reps in camp. And to me, the fact that the Falcons were sort of rotating Person and Schweitzer and Compton there, to me, sort of indicates that I don't think they really see one of those guys really being a starter. I think they're just like, oh, there's an open spot here. We have some practice reps to give some of these guys. Let's see what they can do. Like, to me, if there was really a guy that was really in a position to push Chester, I think that guy would have gotten all the snaps, and that would probably be in Person. I feel like you don't pay Chris Chester $2.6 million to be a backup. So if he does wind up losing the job, then I think he'd probably get cut, similar to what we saw with John Asamoah last year. But it is one of those things where I feel like his play last year, while not great, to me doesn't really deserve to be considered replaceable at this point. Like I don't like for me, Levitri and Chester's play level last year was about the same, and I don't feel like it doesn't make a lot of sense for me for one of those guys to be in the fight for his starting job and the other one not to be. So for me, I feel like Chris Chester, if the injuries linger in the training camp, which I haven't heard anything that suggests that it will, but then I feel like he could potentially wind up losing his job. But at this point, I feel like he's pretty safe. And I really think the battle is going to be from probably like that fifth interior offensive line spot. I think Person's probably going to be pretty safe to keep the backup job. So I think it's really coming down to guys like Schweitzer and Stone and Garland and Huey really sort of competing for that last spot. And all of those guys having a little bit of experience playing center and guard helps them all. I feel like Schweitzer's probably the front runner to get it just because he's the draft pick and the team has a vested interest in developing him. But as we saw last year with Jake Rogers, that doesn't necessarily guarantee you a roster spot. And I do feel like Ben Garland, of those guys, despite my affinity for James Stone, I feel like Ben Garland could be the surprise guy that could wind up taking that spot because I think he's a little underrated based off of what he was in Denver last year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stick with my group that Matt, Chester, Levitri, Person, Schweitzer as the group. Because I think if Mac does go down, you just go back to last year's lineup.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, it was a solid lineup last year. They already have some chemistry. Worst case scenario. That's what you throw out there. I can't trust James Stone. I can't trust him.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that. Yeah, you could say the same thing about Mike Person, but yeah,
I trust Person more than Stone because Person at least showed improvement later on. Stone's been playing center for years, and he still can't snap a ball. Person you could at least forgive because his snaps improved throughout the season. And you're like, all right, well, it's not awful by the end of the season. You weren't going, oh my God, this thing's going to fly over Ryan's head towards the end of the season.
Okay. I don't quite agree, but okay.
Yeah, it's because you're a James Stone apologist.
Well, look, James Stone's snapping to me is not good. It's probably better than my Person snapping, but I think snapping is probably like 10% of the center position. I think people make a bigger deal out of it than they probably should. I think ultimately at the end of the day, it's about your line calls and your ability to make reach blocks and whatnot. And I feel like Stone did those things based off of a limited sample size better than Person did last year. But for whatever reason, the coaching staff likes Person better than Stone. And I'm not trying to suggest that they have no reason to do that. They have their reasons. I don't know, because I'm not there in practices and in film study. So I don't know. But I feel like pound for pound, James Stone is probably a better center than Mike Person. You could probably make the case that Person's a better guard than James Stone is. I would certainly make that case based off of last year. But, I don't think there's much of a difference between those guys as much as people like to make it out to be. I think they're interchangeable, but whatever. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I still don't think James Stone's worth a roster spot.
Okay.
Just based on what I've seen.
Okay. Anything more to add before we get into our short mailbag section?
No, I think we're pretty good on this one.
Okay. You feel like pretty much there's not going to be what we saw last summer with a wholesale changes at the offensive line group at the end of the training camp? You feel like we're going to be able to find 9 or 10 decent guys out of this group of guys?
I think the biggest change that you might see is at swing tackle. Someone will get cut that we're not expecting from a team, and they'll end up getting signed by the Falcons as the swing tackle. And you'll be like, oh, well, all right. Well, that makes sense, Offensive tackle isn't that much different from team to team, so.
Okay.
But, just kind of just kind of going down, there are a couple of guys that I could see getting cut that Atlanta's like, oh, hey, we should pick that guy up. Vincent Painter's one of them. He's a quick guy. Did a good job last year for the Dolphins in limited action. I could see them liking Cameron Fleming or Marcus Cannon as a potential guard if they get cut. If for whatever reason you see a guy like Ryan Harris get cut from Pittsburgh, because they seem to like Gerald Hawkins quite a bit. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking to see the Falcons pick him up. Joe Haig is not guaranteed a roster spot in Indianapolis, and they liked him in the draft process, so you could see that being one of the guys that they pick up. Again, I'm just going down this list. Menelik Watson could be another guy. I know he kind of busted in Oakland, but I could see the Falcons being like, well, this guy probably fits better for our scheme than he fit their scheme because he's quick, not great. Outside of that, no. Maybe like Fawn Cooper.
Okay.
Or Kevin Panfield. But that'd be it.
All right. So let's jump into these mailbag questions. Our first one comes from Jeff Proctor. He asks, what was the Falcons' biggest weakness and which player or players acquired made it stronger?
Linebacker by far was their biggest weakness. I don't think Aaron would disagree that both Durant and Warlow needed to be replaced last year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
And I think this year when we see Devontae Campbell and Sean Weatherspoon come out on the weak side and we see Deion Jones come out in the middle, we're going to be a little bit happier. We're going to see just better football play out there. And we'll see Philip Wheeler again. I thought he did a solid job last year. He kind of reminds me of like mid to late run Stephen Nicholas at this point in his career. Earlier in his career, he was good. Like, I loved Philip Wheeler early in his career. He was by far one of my favorite players back from even when he was at Georgia Tech. I loved the way he played. But at this later point in his career, I do think it makes sense to have like Weatherspoon and Campbell get the majority of those snaps.
Okay. I basically agree, but just to pick a different position group, I'll combine the wide receivers and tight ends. Obviously not including Julio Jones. I feel like the Falcons really didn't have a lot of help there. I think that's one of the reasons why Matt Ryan's production dipped last year. And I feel like Sanu has made them better. I feel like Hooper will make them better. To me, the questions is how much better will they be? So I give the Falcons credit for adding guys like Sanu and Robinson and Hooper to try to strengthen those spots. We know it's hard to sort of, go out there and get that one slam dunk player that's going to suddenly completely do a 180 on that group. But it is one of those things where I do feel like people don't talk quite enough about how bad they were outside of Julio Jones at their offensive skill positions last year. I think they've invested quite a bit in helping that improve this year. And we'll see what it does. Okay, our last question comes from the Falcon in Hawaii. He asks, with the additions of Alex Mack and Sanu on offense, how many points per game do you think the Falcons will average?
Well, considering I thought that they underachieved last year, like tremendously underachieved last year, and they still had, 21 points a game?
Yeah, something like that.
I think they're going to be a good bit better this year. Just so people aren't thinking that I'm like trying to go off the wall here. and say like 30 points a game. 30 points a game would put them right up there with Arizona, Carolina, and New England as the highest scoring offenses in the NFL. I don't see that happening this year. I think they are probably one or two more pieces away from that. Unless Austin Hooper just falls out and Hardy just shows up and is the ultimate slot receiver, they aren't putting up 30 points a game. They aren't looking like the greatest show on turf. It's just not happening. That being said, I could see them closer to that like 25 points a game range, which would still put them in the top 10. It'd put them right around 9 to 10 in the NFL. And I think that's all they would need to really be, is that 25 points a game. Again, it all comes down to the red zone. I've been saying this all off season. If they can sort out the red zone and not have to deal with all the penalties that they did, it wouldn't shock me to see them get back to that 2012 level when, what were they at, like 27 points a game? Something crazy like that. They were at 26.2 points a game. It wouldn't shock me to see them at that 26 and a half points a game area if they can sort out the red zone and not have to deal with the stupidity that they've been dealing with. And they use Hooper, and they have a passing game in the red zone, and they have a little bit of a running game in the red zone like they did the first 4 games, or the first, part of last season, back when Devontae Freeman was just destroying it in the red zone. He had like 8 touchdowns in the first 6 games, and all of them were red zone. Or 9 touchdowns in the first 6 games. They were all in the red zone. If we can get back to seeing that from the Falcons offense, all that scoring in the red zone, that's what'll bring Atlanta back to where they need to be on the scoring list. And I do think the scoring defense is going to be better this year, because surprisingly they did do very well in terms of a yardage improvement last year. They went from, 32nd in 2014 to 16th last year. I mean, that's insane. And then as a scoring defense, Atlanta was 14th in points allowed. So even if they just maintain where they're at for scoring defense, maintain that 21 points allowed per game, if they can just score 25, 26 points a game, they'll be a 10, 11 win team. Easy. But they've got to maintain their defense against a harder, better schedule this year.
Okay. Yeah, I think they sort of max out. I'm not as optimistic that they're going to be a top scoring team, but I do feel like they can sort of get in that 23, 24 points a game range, which would put them somewhere in like the 11 to 15 range based off of last year's scoring offenses. Is like Washington averaged, I think, a little bit more than 24 a game. They were 10th in the league. I think Green Bay was like right around 23 points, and they were 15th. So I feel like that's where they sort of top out. I don't necessarily see this offense being this prolific scoring offense, just because I think so much of their offense is predicated on running the football, which is going to open up a lot of things in the passing game. And I think because of the competition that they're going to be playing this year, I don't think they're going to have as much success running the ball as I think a lot of people expect. So I feel like they're going to struggle to score some points in some of these games coming up. But I do feel like they're going to be significantly better than what they were last year. Basically, if they get up in that 23, 24 point scoring range, that's like almost a field goal better than what they were last year, which, in the situation where you're losing I think we were 5 and 6 in 1-score games, that can mean the difference between 2 or 3 more wins potentially. Yeah, and I guess with the defense, to me, what's going to be interesting to see is I'm going to be curious to see how the defense does this year, because we're going to be facing better quarterback play this year. We're going to be facing better quarterback play, and it's going to be interesting to see whether or not our pass rush can make the leap to sort of match that. I think we were sort of gift wrapped an easy schedule last year with a bunch of backup level quarterbacks, a couple of rookie quarterbacks and whatnot, and we didn't really take full advantage of that. And so I think we're going to have to see this team make a significant leap defensively than what they were last year. Like, I feel like if you put last year's defense against this year's schedule, you're not going to see the massive production and jump in production as much as we saw last year. So I feel like they're going to have to make a similar leap from last year, from 2014 to 2015, even though it may not be as obvious on the stat sheets in terms of their ability to sort of handle the competition that they're going to see this year.
I mean, I agree with you there. It's definitely going to be a better defense, though. Outside of like nickel corner, it feels like everywhere on the defense got more talent this year. Up front, you got Derek Shelby. In the second level, you got Upshaw, Campbell, Jones, all added. I mean, just looking at the roster, I don't see a way where, Deion Jones doesn't end up starting. Devondre Campbell doesn't end up starting. Keanu Neal doesn't end up starting by the end of the season. And I think that alone is going to add a lot of speed. And, yeah, you're going to take your lumps if you put those guys in early, but I'm okay with a defense that can still be average against the schedule, taking lumps early, and then coming out next year and being even better. I don't think that Dan Quinn is looking at this team and saying, hey, we're built for this year and this year only. I think he's looking at this team and saying, hey, we've got a process we're working through. We're getting to where we need to be. And it kind of feels like the first 3 years of Smitty's tenure, just with a coach that's not getting the same kind of luck that Smitty got. Because I feel like that 2008 season was a very, very lucky season. And then 2009, they played a rougher schedule. They went to 9-7. If the Falcons go 9-7 this year, people would go, man, that's a better team. Even though they had only one more win, they're a way better team because they played a rougher schedule. I think that's what we're going to see.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like the Falcons will probably, when we look at the two teams side by side, we'll probably say in most areas the Falcons were better in 2016 than they were in 2015. I think there's a little bit of a leap that people make that means that's going to translate to a better record. I don't think that's going to be necessarily the case, just because I do feel like the Falcons last year were gift-wrapped 10 wins, and they failed to reach that last year with a very easy schedule. And I feel like this year's schedule, not because of strength of schedule, or I think that's sort of a useless stat that people throw out there. I just feel like the matchups that they're going to deal with this year are going to be a lot harder. They're going to be facing, some of the top pass rushes in the league. They're going to be facing some of the top run defenses in the league. They're going to be facing some of the top quarterbacks in the league this year. Things that weren't necessarily true last year, where they were facing a lot of bad run defenses. They weren't facing some of the more prolific pass rushes outside of a handful of games here. And as I said earlier, they had a bunch of backup quarterbacks on their schedule last year. So I feel like the team can get better overall in a lot of areas across the board, but because the competition is going to be so much higher, it may not be reflected in the schedule. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, I'm not worried about how the team handles it. I'm more worried about how the fan base is going to handle that, because our fan base has a tendency to freak out over stuff. So that's going to be interesting to see this year.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about the fan base.
Okay.
Because as Falcons fans, we've all seen it. It's just kind of like, at a certain point, you're just like, you know what, guys, you're overreacting. Just stop. Like, on game day, I'll overreact. But, after that, I've been reining it in. And at a certain point, you're just like, man, this just has to stop. This is ridiculous.
Okay. My reaction to that is it's easy to say that in July, but I think once we get to November and December, I think it's going to be a lot harder for people to do that. But we'll see how it goes. You know, my thing is I have lowered my expectations for this season. So if they come in and are much better than me, that's a positive. Like there's no amount of losing that they can have this year that's going to totally shock me. Like they could go 4-12 and that wouldn't shock me this year. So it is one of those things where, you know, whatever they do, I'm fine with. I think I'm fine with. We'll find out. But we'll see how the season plays out. So yeah, I think they'll be better, but I don't necessarily know if it's going to translate to wins. That's basically what I'm saying. All right, guys, that is our show. If you guys want to send us a mailbag question for us to answer on next week's show, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. Tweet at the show at FalconsPFC. I'm at FalcFans on Twitter. Scott is at Karasik S. Be sure to subscribe and rate it and review us on iTunes. You can find all the links at ProFootballCentral.com if you need to catch up on any of the shows. Next week, we will be talking about the defensive front seven. Am I right, Scott, there in our positional previews? So
yeah, defensive front seven.
Yeah, so D linemen, linebackers, we'll lump that all in. And then
edge defenders. That's how I'm going to break it down. So, like, defensive tackles and base, like, strong side ends. Then it's going to be, like, edge players who are, like, the Leos, the strong side linebackers, and then just the off-ball guys, the weak side middle linebackers.
Okay. So I'm trying to picture the calendar in my head. Are we 2 weeks away from training camp starting?
Yes, I believe so. Training camp starts on the – when does training camp start?
7th?
Yeah, if it starts on the 27th, then we're good because our last show will be on the 26th.
Yeah, and I think that's the day that players report, and I think the first practice is on the 27th. So
that'll be perfect.
Yeah. So we will hopefully wrap up this, positional previews before training camp starts, and then we'll actually, in 3 weeks we'll actually be talking about training camp. So you guys can look forward to that. I know it's been a long off season, and I know you guys are excited. I'm excited. So again, subscribe to us, rate us, review us, check us out, tweet us, and we'll be in touch.